my emotional radar didn't always point me in the right direction. And I got really great education. And once I learned and understood that empathy is the single most attractive trait from one person to another, there is nothing that draws two people together better, stronger, and more reliably than empathy.
We live in such a fast-paced world that chooses to be fast-paced by our devices and or the world of business. And we're convinced that's the only way through. That too often, and great deprecation to all of us, is we don't take time to think.
Do not connect or associate empathy with how you feel on the inside. Feel however you feel. But throughout life will demand and require and put you in scenarios where the thing you've got to do is empathize and care, but the feeling inside you will not be telling you that. And you have to choose to do that even when you don't feel like it.
Welcome to the Tyler Dickerhoof podcast with me, your host, Tyler Dickerhoof. On today's show, I have Brian Kight. Brian is the founder of Daily Discipline, a daily email service that I've subscribed to now, I think for 6+ years, where he has over 65,000 subscribers. He talks about vulnerability, empathy, leadership, discipline, mindset. We're going to get into a lot of those things today, but he also works with keynote speaker, works with sports teams, works with organizations, and much the same that you'll hear a lot today. And so I look at, Brian very much on a different trajectory, but a person that is walking the same path. And I'm so grateful to have this conversation with you, Brian. Thanks for joining us.
Man, glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
So, we talked about this a little bit in the open, and I'd love for you to kind of give us some background, the audience, myself, some background of, we talked about empathy. I just mentioned empathy. You have a unique take on it. Where did that show up for you as far as the experience that empathy was a big deal in leading and serving and interacting with people?
Yeah, I think the first thing I want everybody to know listening, as you guys don't know me, is that empathy is unnatural for me. We're all born with a certain proclivity, attraction, ability that is natural in some various different things. And I'll ask this when I'm talking to groups, and sort of even before empathy, Tyler, if we kind of go underneath that for a second and say, what empathy is, I would say it's an edge of another subject. It's a side of another coin, which is really just emotion. Right? If you think of empathy is, there's a lot of, we can unpack, we could spend 3 hours unpacking empathy just by itself. But I was not born, or what I would say developed growing up, not assigning anybody else responsibility for that development, just part of my life, right? With empathy being at the center of my life. So this empathy was not something that I really learned and really took seriously until I was an adult, which I think is not that uncommon, but that was my path.
Same.
I know a lot of people who were naturally empathetic, married, male, female, back and forth. My son, he's 8 years old. I think he's naturally a little bit more empathetic than I am. I'm pretty sure he is. I laugh like, I don't know if I knew myself at 8, but I know my son at 8. So what I would say, why I start with emotion under is that while I wasn't wired naturally empathetic, I was wired naturally emotional. And I was wired naturally with the ability to read emotions in others. And I was wired naturally to express my own emotions really, freely. That was also part of development for me, is I had two parents who expressed emotion and used emotion and shared emotion. And they came from really opposite ends of the spectrum. And they were divorced when I was a year old. And my dad was a pastor. My mom was not a pastor, is the easiest way to describe the difference between my parents. But they both expressed emotion and expressed love, and we talked about it openly, and we were affectionate and all these different pieces. But it wasn't empathy. And so what I had to learn was how to use my emotion not to forward my agenda and my feelings and my preferences. I'm naturally assertive. I'm naturally confident. I always have been, and I'm naturally emotional. And the upside of that is that I have no problem expressing my opinion. I have no problem asking for what I want, demanding what I want, taking charge and control of, grabbing, right? Not control of other people or circumstances, but like if there's a power vacuum or nobody's leading, I was always always the first to step in. If there was a quiet moment in the conversation or sometimes a breath, I was in because I could see that I could trigger this emotion and I could, and I like to make people happy, but that wasn't empathy, right? Like wanting to cheer people up or that's to me, that's not empathy, right? That's maybe emotional awareness. And so it got me in trouble a lot. It benefited me a ton. I'm competitive, but it got me in trouble because I would miss signals. I would prioritize my desires over other people's desires. I wouldn't, I didn't learn until mid-20s, right? Mid-20s or late 20s that a huge part of empathy was me putting my interests, desires, impulses backseat in a moment to just leave more room and space for somebody else at the right moments, for somebody else to take it wherever they wanted to go. Whereas I would say in my previous life or earlier in my life, I took, if we're having a conversation or we're with 3 other couples and there's 8 of us at a table, I took silence or somebody not saying something over a 60-second time period as basically an invitation for me to take it wherever my emotions wanted to take it, to wherever my agenda was. That was how I read the situation. And so my emotional radar didn't always point me in the right direction. And so I look at empathy, and then ultimately what I had a couple good experiences with some learning environments where I got out of I stepped off the speaker stage and put myself into the chair, and I got really great education. I learned from really, really great people. And once I learned and understood that, because somebody taught me, that empathy is the single most attractive trait from one person to another. There is nothing that draws 2 people together better, stronger, and more reliably than empathy. And that attraction and that draw is not purely romantic. When I say attraction and draw, I mean what magnetizes one human being to another human being is empathy. And that's relevant in sales. That's relevant in leadership. That's relevant in parenting. That's relevant in marriage. That's relevant in courtship. That's relevant in, putting out digital videos. Like I see the same kind of things you see. I watch people who put out videos and all they do is judge and beat the shit out of people. And then they're like, oh, my videos don't get views. I'm like, well, yeah, because all you're doing is judging. You're just getting mad at who watches a video that makes you feel bad about the way that you're currently living. Now, I like to challenge people, but the empathy side is I'm going to challenge, but I'm also going to recognize why we're doing that, why I want to pull it in, because I want to be an attractive source for everybody, including the people who are like kind of pre-wired to not like me or things that I talk about. I want to be attractive. I want to speak about it in ways that show it. And ultimately what it comes back to, Tyler, is this. We use these words empathy. Here's all empathy is. Like all of it, I love to simplify things and I like dealing with physics, right? Physics.
So is this Brian's definition of empathy?
No, it's not my definition of empathy. I'll give you that though, but I will give you that. No, this is the mechanics, right? So this is like, okay, you're saying gravity. It's like, well, what is it? There's an equation or there's something at work here. So what's at play with empathy is this, that what human beings really want is they want to be understood. And then they want to feel like you get what's going on within me. That's it. Like that's all empathy is. Do you get what's going on within me? And do you understand? That's it. Like you don't need to agree. It's just that's every human on the planet wants that. And we use the word empathy to capture it. And unfortunately, empathy has gotten kind of stolen and pushed into this passive, weak end. And it's just not what it is.
So how do you define it?
Find out what is important to the other person and make it important to you in a way that they value and can feel.
Okay. So try this on for size and let me know what you think. To me, I define empathy as putting your arm around someone and walking with them.
A lot, yeah. That, I think there's a couple pieces, right? I like that, and even just the, you know, the visual and then the physical manifestation, even if it's just in the mind of saying, okay, if I imagine that when I'm having a conversation with my wife,
Yeah.
not that I actually do it, but if I'm picturing that in a conversation with my wife, I heard there was a negotiation book. Might have been Never Split the Difference. I think it might have been that one, or maybe it was a different one. Basically, where he's like, you want to be sitting, treat the conversation like you're sitting on the same side of the table.
Yeah.
Right. So physically in your mind, and physically do it if you can, but also like physically imagery in your mind, get on the same side of the table with them. I heard there was another book where she talked about, you got to both get on the balcony and look down. Let's look down at our conversation. Let's look down at our situation together, shoulder to shoulder, side by side, from a balcony looking down at it. So anything that puts us in this physical and visual representation of something that is very hard to measure and actually assess, like empathy is. There's no true measure for it. Anything that pushes us into that direction, those are all steps in the right way. And where I try to push it, sort of, maybe, I don't know if it's a step further or try to add to that, is there's always something going on within another person. Always. Mm-hmm. Right? And you know that because there's stuff going on within you that's completely separate from this conversation. Like, that's just the same thing with me, right? My kids are going to come home at some point, and in my mind, I'm like, are they going to come sprinting in here and do what 8 and 5-year-olds do? And I don't know if they're going to do that. But so I look at empathy of, there's something important to everybody. Do you know what it is? Or have you just projected and assigned and assumed and then thrown it on to them? And then you're judging them or treating them with something you invented in your head and assigned to them, rather than just saying, hey, what is important to you? And I'll tell you a perfect place where I practice this. The place where I practice this is in Fight Club. He called it single serving friends, right? Tyler Durden called them single serving friends.
I mean, we're going back to a classic.
Yeah, flight attendants, Uber drivers, hotel check-in. So I practice it. I practice it with these transactional moments with people that I'm having this very small, short window of time with, for which there is no real need for any emotional connection. And I practice it as the consumer. So when I check out at the grocery store, when I go through the line at TSA, I will look at the person and I will practice, for my own workout with my, I treat it like my empathy muscles, is how quickly can I find out what matters to this person and make that, whatever I find out, important to me in a way that they can feel it and value it, which means that now it's find, if you think of those two words, right? Find what's important to somebody else and make it important to you, right? The two verbs there are find and make. So the first, it gives me direction, it gives me action, it teaches me the disciplines. The first discipline is I have to find, right? Which presumes an interest, but nonetheless, you got to find. It could be utilitarian, I suppose, right? It's still empathy if it's utilitarian, but find. And then the second is I have to make it important to me. So this is not a passive process. This is not it should just feel. No. There's no feeling involved. There's no feeling involved in this. It's find and make. And so I'll go through TSA and I'll ask myself, what is important to this person checking IDs? What's important to them? They're sitting on this chair at a 9-hour shift checking IDs. I'm like, what do you think is important to that person? And a lot of crowds will say, security and safety. And I say, no, hold on. That's not, maybe you're seeing different TSA people than I'm seeing. But no, if you were sitting on a chair for 9 hours checking IDs with a line of travelers in 2025, what percentage of your time is thinking about when do I get to go home? Probably most of it. So my natural, when I walk up, I ask the person checking the IDs, hey, what have you done with your shift? Now, every now and then they'll think I'm asking them on a date, because it's not a common thing for a TSA agent to get asked by somebody going through. But they'll say either I just got here, I'm right in the middle, or I'm almost at the end. And every now and then they brush it off, but most of the time they answer honestly, and they kind of have some kind of emotion that comes up along with that. Like literally just 3 days ago, asked the young lady, I'm like, where are you at in this shift? And she goes, oh man, she goes, I just got here. I said, what time are you done? And it was maybe 10 a.m. She's like, I'm done at 6. And I said, awesome. I said, we got to start somewhere, and I appreciate you being here. And all she said was, she's like, thank you. Like totally surprised. And I didn't do anything extraordinary. There's no superhuman effort. It's not because I have a soft spot for TSA people. I just treated her like a human being, and I made an educated guess about what I thought she might be valuing. Right? And then I let her sort of confirm or deny, and I had 30 seconds to do it. So if I can do those reps there, now all of a sudden that muscle is strong to be doing it in the places where it's more relevant and more important for the things that are in my orbit.
It becomes a common practice.
Yeah, it's like anything else, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not concerned about how much I bench press or how much I squat, but if some scenario comes up where I need to physically move something and I'm strong enough to do it, it's because of all the squatting and bench pressing. It's not the number, it's this. And so same thing, like if I'm dealing with a friend who's going through something, or I'm dealing with a hard scenario in our life where my wife and I are at odds on something, like it happens, and my muscle isn't strong enough, I don't get to blame my wife. I got to look and say, my muscle of empathy wasn't strong enough to actually stay tight and connected to what she was needing in this particular moment. That's how I think of it.
So you mentioned that, which I agree. I think grew up very similar, where empathy wasn't a muscle that I practiced much, and I saw the deficiencies of it. I didn't see it until I was in my late 30s. You were fortunate enough to find that in your late 20s. Tell us about what I call a window shattering experience, something that showed you and realized, this is much bigger than I've given it credit to. I need to really understand this.
I was at dinner at my dad's house, and we had our family friends over, husband, wife, their teenage daughter. I don't remember the exact age, but it was somewhere mid-20s, maybe 27, something like that, maybe. And we had a dinner. The dinner finished. It was either that night or it was the next day. I was with my dad, and he said, hey, did you notice dinner last night? I said, yeah, dinner was great. And he said, are you sure? I had a great time. It was awesome. Love those guys. And he said, you didn't see what happened? And I said, what? And he said, you sucked the oxygen out of the room. I was like, what do you mean? He said, nobody else spoke. You sucked all the oxygen. You just dominated, and everybody just stopped talking because you just held court, right? You just, if there was a second of silence, you jumped in and you took it over. And the context was that we were getting ready to go on vacation with this family on a houseboat down at Lake Cumberland in, I think, Tennessee, a week or two from then. And he said, listen, I don't think you were self-aware of the impact of how you were interacting at dinner. But if you do that when we're on a boat for 7 days with people, it's going to be a very uncomfortable 7 days. So maybe take a step back and think about, what does good interaction look like, and what do you want it to be like, and what experience do you want people to have with you? Because we heard all of your opinions, and I don't know that you asked anybody else for what any of their opinions were, and if they started to share it, you came over the top with yours. And I will tell you, I asked questions, and there was not, it was one of those moments you talk about, like window shattering, was instantaneously the night replayed in my head. And it was almost like I saw video playback, like I was back in college football again, where I saw film of myself in my mind. And, you call it window shattering. I call it an OSM, an oh shit moment, where I was like, oh, no, that was exactly what happened. And that's a problem.
So let me ask you this. What did that do to your personal confidence?
I'm self-acknowledged here. I don't know where this came from. I don't know how, but nothing. It didn't do anything.
Okay.
There is no outcome. There is no consequence that takes that away from me. Because I don't attach my confidence to my outcomes. I attach it to my belief. And so for me, when I heard that, immediately it was recognition. It was immediately acceptance. And it was immediately interest in how can I deliver a better experience. And it was matched with the confidence of, oh, all I have to do is learn how to do that well. It's not a hard thing. It's not, but this is how I think of anything. That's not a hard thing. It's just not something I'm currently skilled or refined at doing, or I've never really thought of it that way, which to that point I hadn't really. And so when he told me, I said, oh, I mean, that's all that is me being quiet and asking a question. And then when somebody talks about something, validating and listening to what they're talking about. That's not even remotely complex. So for me to resist that was kind of, and then once I saw the tape, I was like, well, yeah, of course it would be that experience. It was kind of natural, right? So from that point forward, what I did was, and I still to this day, 15 years into doing this, maybe 3-4 times a year, plus or minus once a quarter, I will go on and I teach this as well, but I will go on a 1 week, basically a 1 week verbal and expression shutdown. For a week, I will stop expressing. And people hear that and they're like, you go like Buddhist monk. No, not Buddhist monk. But what I mean is to recalibrate myself. And this is what I do because of who I am, but I think it's a good practice for anybody.
I understand where you're going. Yeah.
Right? Is I just stop expressing for a week. And when I get in interactions, literally I move through my normal life, but I don't express. And I just leave the space empty and I ask questions and I mentally, Tyler, cede the floor to everybody I interact with for whatever they want. And if that's silence when we're together, then it's quiet. But if that's something where you talk for an hour and I talk for 2 minutes because I'm asking a question or you ask me something specific, great. But I do not verbalize and express mine out. And what that does is that's basically a way for me to check myself from letting my self-awareness get too far away. And it gives me a visceral experience of repositioning myself with the people in my life so that they know I'm listening to you and whatever's important to you is important to me. So much so, I'm not even going to talk about whatever's on my mind. Because I know that in all the other times, I'm going to do that just fine. But for that 7 days, nothing.
As I think about my own personal experience there of when, I did a 360 review and everyone's like, no, it's all about you. And I'm like, it's not about me. So it's kind of like, oh, okay, I gotta understand this. There was also a faith component to where, for me, a lot of that, why I was like that steamroller, that bulldozer is how it was bulldozer, was because I was always trying to prove myself. I was always trying to prove that I had value, that I had something to offer. And I had yet to learn that the biggest thing I have to offer is to sit there and listen and be curious and ask questions and do what I get to do here. And, so that process, but understanding why was I that way? And for me, it was this intensity that was a mask to my insecurity. And I've realized that that is the case for so many others and so many leaders, especially in a world, as you know, you go into professional, you go into coaching, you go into all these leaders. Like, the more that you suck the oxygen out of the room, you're almost viewed as being better at what you do, as opposed to the guy that comes around and just puts his arm around you and say, hey, Brian, why are you here? What can I learn about you? Going through that process, how can I help you get there? And it's my job to make sure you get there, right? That it's such a different, to me, which is practicing empathy.
It is. And something as you're saying that, I think for those of you who are worried that empathy lowers standards or turns you or the people that you're doing it with soft, or one of the common ones that I hear from people, and just kind of comes back to, did this break my confidence? And I'll tell you a practical reason why it didn't. But one of the reasons I hear about why I want to do empathy is, okay, yeah, but when I'm done empathizing or, whatever, they kind of look at it as like sort of this let me get through this so I can get to what I want to do anyway, is even if you are in that spot where it's, look, I don't need empathy. I just need you to do what I'm saying. Or I need you to understand this point, or I need you to take this because whatever, you're wrong, or I'm in charge, or whatever. Parents in the same spot. Like parents, they don't want to listen to their kids, and they shut it down, and then the kid, and because they just wanted to go do it. Here's something that I recognized right away, and why I dove into it head first, and it is like flawlessly undisputed. And that is that if what is important to you is getting your point across, there is nothing that will position you to be able to do that faster than empathy. If you want people to follow you or do what you say or buy from you or believe in you or comply or be obedient, whatever, right? The best way to do that is through empathy, because 5 minutes of empathy can save you 5 weeks of resistance. That is not an overstatement. 5 minutes of empathy can save you 5 weeks of somebody resisting you if you're skilled and you're intent and you're there, because it unlocks this door that people shut within themselves, which is essentially, I might, I'll give you really, really simple example, but we've all done this. Like if you ever coach somebody or if you ever given feedback or you got kids, you've experienced where you were trying to get something across to somebody from you're trying to tell them something, teach them something, share something. And the person you were talking to, again, whether it was professional or personal, is they had that look on their face where you could tell that their shield was up and they were just nodding to get through the conversation.
Yeah,
like,
closed off.
Yeah, I'm not gonna run away from the conversation, but I'm not letting this stuff that you're saying in, and I'm just gonna move on. Right? And you can see it on their face. And then you call it out and they go, nope, and they just deny it. Now you're stuck because the door is shut. You're in purgatory. And what I realized right away was, wait a second. If I go back to that dinner where my dad gave me that feedback, I think to myself this: how many of the things that I was so interested in expressing just leaked onto the ground and nobody believed or heard or was interested in because they didn't like me in that particular moment. And I hadn't listened to them. And so they just shut me out. So the very intent that I had in that room was unfulfilled. I missed the mark. And then I thought to myself, well, how would I hit the mark? I believed in everything I said. I was interested in the conversation. And certainly I wish that people, were interested and liked what I had to say. I don't want them to not like it. Well, what would make them interested? Oh, if they felt like I understood them and they had some ground, and then I was interacting with the points I was making with what they were making, and they felt like I understood them, they're going to hear what I have to say and be either more receptive to it or understand it better or want to engage with it more. So I took that and said, okay, this isn't me lowering any of my perspectives or anything like that. It's actually a way for me to get them across better. But by positioning myself to do it first, and then being able to deliver it through a much more open channel. So I think of empathy as a way to open the channel, right? Open the channel with empathy, right? I think that's a good visual. Like don't clog the bridge. Like don't separate it's like PVC pipe, right? It's like when you don't empathize, you're disconnecting the PVC pipe underneath. When you empathize, you're connecting those pipes and you're widening them for all this great stuff to pass through, which for the expressors like me, it's a perfect scenario.
So let's take that image of the PVC pipes, right? Connect those pipes. In my mind, empathy is the action, the result of opening the valve, right? You have two pieces of pipes connected with a valve. You open that valve. That is the result of empathy. To me, and again, play this out, I'm just wondering, is for me, I believe the process of opening the valve is, I need to be vulnerable. I need to put my arm around you. I have to expose myself that, hey, it's not about me. I care about you. It's let's not make this up that it's about me. It's about you. And to me, that's what allows empathy to really happen, is the choice of me to be vulnerable, much like what you've talked about. You process through that. Oh, I had to be vulnerable and understand if I would have just taken more interest in them, then my points would have been valued at some point. And I think coming back to like the perfect scene, right? You're talking about you're working with someone either in sales or leadership, whatever, and you have this directive and they're just closed off. My belief is the reason they're closed off is because they tend to believe, dude, it's all about you. You haven't been vulnerable enough to really express to me why this should matter to both of us. That's my philosophy. I'd love for you to just run with it.
I think maybe 2 points. I think the word vulnerability or being vulnerable scares people for all the obvious reasons, right?
Yeah.
I guess if I'm trying to walk somebody through empathy who is wanting to get better at it, wherever they are, I'm not sure where vulnerability shows up in the process. And I say that for this reason. Maybe I'll pair the second one up with. Is that I don't know that you have. Let me put it this way. It's kind of like levels or stages, right? There is absolutely a stage and a level of empathy where vulnerability is crucial, and you can't get further without it. My observation is a lot of people view just like not expressing what they want as vulnerability, right? It's like, oh, I feel so vulnerable and I'm not just obeying my impulses, right? Yeah. And that's not vulnerability, right? Yeah, like vulnerability, that's not it. Vulnerability is exposing a part of yourself in some way where you're entrusting somebody else to take care of it, right? Because it's either fragile or they could judge you or a bunch of different things. And most people in my observation are, I say most people, whatever, maybe it's not, most could be 51%, but, or 40%, whatever it is. They're not even far enough down the line where vulnerability is something they even need to worry about, in my observation. The first thing they got to worry about, and I only say that because like I find that if we kind of make the bigger challenges too low, right? Like if I'm trying to teach hang clean or power clean to a brand new lifter, it's like no, hang clean or power cleans are good, but we got to get like goblet squats and back squats down, right? A bunch of other things. Is I come back to before you even need to get vulnerable, you need to make a choice. And the choice revolves around whether or not you're going to make what's important to somebody else important to you. And in my mind, that does not require a ton of vulnerability. It requires decision, discipline, intention. And the first piece is being aware that empathy, most people, when they hear the word empathy, they can't detach from feelings and the way that I feel. And I think one of the big unlocks for people that I have found in teaching this is that caring for somebody else, empathy, it's not a feeling, it's a decision and it's an action. This is one of the cool parts about being a human being. You can care and empathize with somebody you don't even like. And in fact, like, listen to this for a second. Like, this changes you if you're ready to hear this and let this in. When is it most important to care and empathize? For what kind of people? It's most important to care when you don't feel like it. It's most important to empathize with somebody you don't feel like empathizing with. Because when you don't feel like caring, when you don't feel like empathizing, the easiest thing in the world is to not do it. If my daughter walks in here, she's 5 years old, if she walks in here and she's having a tough day, it requires zero skill for me to empathize with her. Zero effort. It is biologically natural for me as her dad to step in and empathize with her. If my wife is having like a tough day and she comes in and she kind of like just breaks down like, I'm having such a, that's so easy to empathize with, okay? Right? But if a Democrat is struggling with the results of the election, that's not easy for a Republican to empathize with. But Republicans were just there 4 years ago. And so, yeah, you know exactly what's going on inside that other person. Maybe not exactly, but you know enough, right? You were just there. So the unlock that I want people to hear is this. Do not connect or associate empathy with how you feel on the inside. Feel however you feel, right? You can make that sort of a parallel track and adjust that. But throughout life will demand and require and put you in scenarios where the thing you've got to do is empathize and care. But the feeling inside you will not be telling you that. And you have to choose to do that even when you don't feel like it. I have no emotional connection to TSA agents. I don't emotionally care about my Uber driver, right, in the traditional sense. But if I get in there and I say to myself, I wonder what's important to this person. I wonder where they're at. I wonder what's their life. I wonder what's their first name. I look up first names on the tags of TSA. I try to find, they put it's like an initial and then their last name on the thing, and then their badge is always floating there. Same thing with gate agents and all the rest of the stuff. And I will look and find their first name, and I'll just try to use their first name. I'm not trying to suck up I'm just, you know what we like to be called? We like to be called our name. And when a stranger recognizes us in that way, and I have no emotion about this, but I'm making a decision to care. So what I would tell people is climb your way to that vulnerability. But if starting is just saying, I need to make choices independent of my feelings, you're always going to have to do that. And so if you start there and you start climbing that ladder, by the time it gets to, I need to get vulnerable here, you're going to have, change my analogy, lay those bricks, right? Lay the brick of knowing how to do that. Now you have like a really big, sturdy, strong wall that when it's time to get vulnerable, you've laid a lot of really good bricks to stand on to say, my vulnerability doesn't feel so shaky now. I'm standing on a stronger foundation on which to be vulnerable with my empathy, which is maybe revealing some of myself or putting my priorities on the back burner. That's where we start to feel vulnerable, but you want to do that on a strong foundation. And that foundation to me is choice, decision, action, independent of emotion.
Does
that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. And it dovetails with this idea and belief. Is the reason to practice what you discuss as far as I don't have to agree, whatever, but I can choose to say, hey, I'm going to understand what's important to you and the reasons why. And we may even disagree on that because I value you. And I think that's been one of the limitations I think I had of myself is I was unsure of my personal value. So it was very hard to extend value in others because I wasn't firm in my foundation. And I think where we look at our world today is you bring up, the political classes. It's like, well, does one party have value over the other? It's like, no, they both have value. They both have value. And if we can accept that, then it's easier to empathize. And I think it comes back to, all right, why don't we understand our own personal value? Or is someone valuing me so they're spending time with me to record a podcast? Well, I look at this, and you wrote this. I don't know when you wrote it, but you wrote it. And I think is very fitting here is we rarely see how to use empathy in defining moments with key relationships, especially from strong models, because it's not modeled.
The number of people modeling the passive, what people see as weak version of empathy is all over the place, right? It's the Stuart Smalley, right? I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. And it's a joke. Like it's a
doormat.
Yeah, correct. People use it humorously, right? And they do it, and then they say, like they do it all the time. When I talk about the strong empathy, right? If we kind of look at it, so just the strength in empathy, right? A backbone with empathy. There's not a lot of models for that.
Here's what I believe. And I had someone define this, help me with this. Empathy's on a spectrum. You talked about the Stuart Smalley, one side of the spectrum, that's a doormat. The other side of the spectrum is an asshole. Okay? That's your extremes. The healthy empathetic is in the middle. And I believe, coming back to what you said earlier, they express, like you have shared today, an authentic vulnerability, a care, a compassion, a desire to express empathy because they value others. And to your point, we so often don't see those people on videos because you know what? Those aren't the ones that are boistering with their confidence, their intensity, their arrogance. And we don't think that person that's willing to be authentically vulnerable, like you've shared in your experiences, like I try to, as someone we should model, because that's not what society has propelled as the model football coach. The model football coach is the yeller and screamer, and we see the snippets of it. And yet it's not the Marcus Freemans, the Ryan Day who, gets a huge hug from his everything linebacker. It's the Dan Campbell who it's a little different, But man, he expresses so much empathy, and there is one person to model it, in my belief, when we're talking about sports. But you ask Jared Goff what he thinks about Dan Campbell, and I can guarantee without a doubt, he goes, I will do anything for that man because he believed in me when no one else did. He cared about me when I was thrown to the trash heap. And you see what's happened.
I'll give you 2 examples. I want to come back to, I'll talk about what I think is so strong and powerful about, say, like Dan Campbell, because Dan Campbell, the head coach of the Detroit Lions, nobody's going to accuse that guy of being soft. I mean, he talked about when he got hired of, we will bite your kneecaps off to win, right? So this
But he's also the guy that's not afraid to show tears.
Correct, right? This is a bad man, right? In all the good ways. But before Dan, you said something. You said something a few minutes ago that I want to make sure that everybody connects the other side, the unspoken side of something you just said. You talked about empathy as this expression of, I'm going to do this because I value you, right? And so I want you all to understand that if doing empathy, giving empathy is a signal I value you, then what is failing to give empathy? Right? What that signals to people, and this is what got my attention, what that signals to people is, I don't value you. Mm-hmm. So if empathy is a signal that I value you, and it's a demonstration that I value you, then lack of empathy is a signal and a demonstration that I do not value you. And it doesn't come across in words, and I promise, because this has happened to all of us. It's happened to you. It's happened to me, right? Listener, it's happened to you. I promise you that you have missed moments and scenarios to empathize. And the signal you have sent and what you have demonstrated is that you do not value that person. And there's only one thing worse than that, right? There's only one thing worse than saying, I don't value you. The only thing worse than that is saying, I don't even recognize you enough to not value you. The only thing worse is being invisible. If you tell me you don't like me and you don't value value me, then at least you saw me and you just said, hey, I don't measure up.
You're not for me. Yeah.
But man, what happens a lot of times is the way that we operate and what we demonstrate is not even as good as saying, I don't value you. We would be better off a lot of times to say, and I tell people this all the time, people react viscerally to me, but I'm dead serious. If you go home and you are married and your options are pretend and act like you're listening to your spouse, even though you're not, because you don't care, or say, hey, I don't care and I'm not interested, so I'm going to go do something else. I'm not interested. Tell them that you don't care and you're not interested and go about your day. Do not sit in front of them and pretend like you're listening when they know and you know you're not listening. You are much better off declaring exactly where you are, because here's why. They know you're not listening. They know you're not caring. They know you're not valuing what they're saying or why they're saying it. And then they try to follow some routine. And the result is the worst thing possible. And that is, you treat somebody not even with the respect to say that I don't value you. You treat them as if they were invisible. And it makes them feel invisible, and it makes them feel small, and it makes them feel worthless, not even worth giving the honesty and truth to say, no, thanks. So the unspoken side of what you said, yes, I agree with you. Empathy is 100% saying I value you, and that's great. But the opposite of empathy is just saying I don't value you. And if we're not even sharp enough to put ourselves in that position, and we just kind of blow through and blow by, and this happens in business all the time and in meetings and all kinds of stuff. Kids, I care so little that I'm not even recognizing you're here or you have a concern or something to be valuable or valued at all. I'm just going to blow right through. And next thing you know, I'm invisible, and now you're so out of touch. So just know there's nothing you can do.
A depiction of that is like the leader who kind of says, well, until they do X, Y, until they've been here 6 months, I don't even care who you are. Well, you've essentially said you don't value anyone. instead of saying, hey, I value you. And at the same point, in that respect, these are the conditions or whatever. Hey, I value doesn't mean I have to lead you every day, but I value being here, as opposed to the ones like, you're not even worth my time. Because what happens there is people don't stick around when they're great to figure out if at some point that's going to change. They're like, if I'm not valued, dude, I'm out. Whether I quit or not, I'm not doing it. And it's funny because some people believe, again, coming back to sports, oh, that's the way to be in sports because it's so business, so productive. It's like, quite honestly, you look at the most successful coaches and they have tremendous value of everyone. They understand the business. They understand the role of it. But the only way to get the most out of people is understanding, signifying, equating, making it so clear what value they bring and helping them reach that potential. And yet I come back to the leaders that aren't able to do that it's because of their own lack of awareness. What you said, that
Yeah.
I suck the oxygen out of the room and I don't even know it.
Yep, exactly. So you're always on that spectrum, right? You're always on the spectrum of showing people that you value them, showing people, demonstrating you don't value them, or demonstrating that you don't even see them, which is not, I don't even see you to know that you're valuable. Yeah. You can't escape, neither can I, being on that spectrum with other people. Make a decision about where you want to be. Listen, as long as you're willing to own it, no problem telling somebody I don't value your perspective. I tell people that. I got no problem. Like if I'm at a spot where, listen, like I don't value that perspective. I work with college football teams. People share college football opinions with me. Listen, I can look and listen. Yep. If you share a few opinions and I look and you're like in left field and I got no problem saying no, that perspective is not one that I'm interested in listening to, and I don't value it because no, there's nothing, you have no credibility to be able to share that. So I had no problem saying that because that's where I'm actually at. I'm not going to pretend like you're saying really good stuff and it's, oh, this is worthwhile and I really care about your opinion. I don't. Okay. But so like if you're in that, fine, but you just have to accept, where that's at. And if you do it too much or too often or whatever, if you're with your spouse and every night you come home and they say something and you're like, look, I don't care. BK told me to tell you if I don't. Well, okay, but if you do that all the time, then you got to come to grips with the fact that you're with somebody that you don't even care about anything going on in their life and they're feeling that from you. There's consequences, but don't pretend. So then you start saying, all right, now I got to own my choices. And now again, I'll speak for myself, right? I want to be somebody who values other people, but I also want to make sure that I'm not pretending to value things that I don't, because then I send the wrong signals and I get myself in the wrong relationships. So I want to value what I value, and then whatever I don't value, I don't. And I make no apologies for that. And I own all of it. And if somebody wants something and I don't value it, we all draw our line somewhere. I just want to be very, very clear about where it's at. I just don't want people to be invisible in my life.
What you just, in my opinion, described there is this choice to be authentic. And authentic doesn't mean that you rant, scream, viscerally offend. It means, yeah, I'm honest. Coming back to that point about vulnerability, and I think one of the great opportunities is to be authentically vulnerable. Like, what you just shared with me is like, hey, I appreciate you have an opinion. I don't necessarily hold the same opinions, and so great. And that level of authenticity, what I believe is that establishes real empathy, and it also creates a real opportunity for relationships, as opposed to, dude, are you just using me to step on me to get wherever? Because, I think we've come to a place in our world where people realize that doesn't work.
There's too many people who are too good at it now. If you're competitive, there's too many people who are really good at this. And this is real estate. Like, I don't know, go back 80 years ago. I mean, you're 45. I mean, when you were in high school, how far did your opinion stretch? A couple lunch tables.
If that.
Like, yeah. I mean, how many kids from other high schools were you really good friends with in high school? A couple, maybe, if that. Like, I don't know that I was friends with anybody from a different high school when I was growing up in California. So, but now people can get an experience, like they see how a lot of people interact. So previously in the world, we were being compared to our local the people we could see. And so when that traveling circus or the con man or the traveling preacher came through, like that was that was such a big experience because it was a behavior pattern and a way of being heard, listened, felt, understood. That when we traveled, like you saw, like all of a sudden your circle, all of a sudden you started seeing different behavior patterns. That was very rare. Well, now you see everything. You've seen every movie. You've seen all the YouTube videos. You've seen the podcasts. You've seen this. You've seen all of it. You've seen this full spectrum where the people who say, I get you, I understand you, right? I know what's going on with you. Man, that's attractive. Next thing you know, the local people that I'm interacting with, they don't do that for me. And if you're raising young people, I tell coaches this all the time. Oh, TikTok this and Instagram and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, listen, no. If that place is more interesting and more attractive and more empathetic and is bringing more interest to them than you do, you lose. Period. Like you lose. They were better at it. Like you came in and you made them, shut up and players play, coaches coach and do what I say. Dude, if I'm comparing that experience to the rest, is there any reason why he's running away from you? So making a decision about how you want to operate, right? That's certainly one thing, but make sure you understand the environment and the context that you sit in. Is if you're not good or interested in this, people have a lot of options and a lot of places they can go. And I guess I would just say there's when we look at people sort of, we spend all this time on our phones and and all these different pieces. Yeah, there's a lot of technology and, apps and, patterns and, obviously people are scheming all day and strategizing on how to hook you and all that. Of course that goes on. I think one of the things we don't talk about a lot is, if you compare what the typical conversation between a husband and a wife is at home, and then they both open their phone and they can kind of access any emotion that they want, and their spouse isn't working that hard to give it to them, the phone's an easy place to go in and kind of feed yourself some feelings that you want. Right? Like that's not a pleasant thing I enjoy saying, but when I look at people with like big, strong, healthy relationships that do a lot of that stuff well, like they're not burying themselves in their phone, like because they're interested in that next. They're vibing, and it's not perfect. It's not all the time, but it's strong. It's more of this, right? And it's less of this.
Not to belabor the word, but it's like, are you getting satisfaction in validation from a phone, from something extrinsic, or is that validation coming intrinsically through empathetic relationships where it's like, hey, we can go through this together? And I think that's what comes back to, in my mind, as I envision putting your arm around someone, is that means we have to walk in concert. Like we have to be step in step. And that means I can't be dragging you along and vice versa. Like, no, we have to figure out that pace for each other. But that's worthwhile because that means we're both invested in it. And I think the organizations, the relationships, period, families, you bring up marriages that take time to at least express those things authentically and not just lie to you and like, yeah, I'm listening, but I'm not listening and I don't care, are able to resiliently get through adversity better than the ones that it just blows up the entire ship.
I agree completely, because when you hit the hard stuff, the other person and people around you may not know what's going on inside you. And they may not even be capable. But I'll tell you who you want around you in those moments is you want people who are interested in what's going on inside you. Because if those people are interested, if they want to put their arm around you, we might have to walk together for a year before I'm ready to say it. We might have to walk together for a year before you understand what I'm saying. We might have to walk together for a year before we're even capable of talking about it. But you want somebody by your side, you want teammates, whether it's a spouse teammate, family teammate, work teammate, sports team, whatever. You want people who are interested. You want people who are choosing and trying. And the people who don't try and the people who are disinterested, like those relationships naturally move to a further circle away, a little further out in our orbit. And if they are tight in our orbit, they don't spin as tightly anymore.
What really drives you to speak about this, to do this work, to write daily every day and have for years. Like, what down here drives that?
I ask myself that a lot, and the truthful answer is I'm not completely sure. That's the truthful answer. I do care. I believe in people. I feel called to it. The Latin word vocare, vocare, is where we get the word vocation. And so vocare means to be called, and a vocation is your calling. And so we think of vocation as work, job, but the origin of why we put the word vocation there is it wasn't work and job and a way to pay the bills. It was your life's calling. That's where it came from. And I feel that way. Where it came from, I don't know. We'd probably have to consult, Horace or Odysseus or what's his Homer to find what and who is the muse. The truth is I don't completely know, but it's unmistakable for me, and that's probably the truest. I also have a I'm really interested in the truth, and I'm really interested in, and I credit my dad for this, for sparking this, right?
Again, part of that is, man, is your dad sparking that, but even more the drive, especially, his life ending, and just, is that even more, as I, asked back in the last, 16, 18 months ago, is that even a bigger drive than what it was before? And just, again, it's the continuing the same question. I just wonder.
I don't know. I mean, I give him credit for showing me sort of, hey, there's this thing, right? Like, and this thing is he would always, and it's still a term that I use. He would call it, he called it the physics of life. And once I saw it, I became enamored with the physics, not with what he was showing me, but basically, like, I became enamored with the topic, the category of the physics of life. And I don't know, it's fueled part by what I would kind of call the impersonal physics. And I have some of these conversations where, I'm a little bit different, than most. And I don't mean that in like, I'm special or I'm super unique or nobody's like me. I just mean like, I can recognize that the way I see and think about certain things is just, I know that it's not common. I don't care what's true. I just care about finding the truth. And what I've discovered and why that makes me different is that, and I just wrote about this in Daily Discipline the other day, I think it's really dangerous to want something to be true.
Mm.
Because when we want something to be true, we manipulate our view of reality to make it appear true based on our desires, as opposed to looking at what is true and then working from there. And from the moment this hooked me in college, I've only been interested in what's true. And I have no problem living a truth and then seeing and exposed to, hey, that is not true, this is true, and saying, well, I built my life on this, but now I got to build my life on that because that's true.
Yeah.
The way I look at it, it's like walking out being like, it's a sunny day, and then I walk out and it's pouring rain. I'm not going to say that it's wrong that it's raining. Or I'm not going to say it shouldn't be raining. And I'm not going to say it's not raining. I'm going to say I thought it was sunny and I was going to the pool. It's not. It's rainy and it's gray. So that's what is. But I treat empathy and focus and leadership and all that. I don't care what is true. I care in finding the truth and what works. And I let that guide me. And so when I'm reading or I'm studying that's why I study old stuff only exclusively. I don't read new things. Is that's what I'm looking for. Is I'm looking for the stuff that I can hold up to the light of and the pressure test of, and the scrutiny of all of history and every context and every application and every scenario and all of this, and say, does this stand up to the truth independent of my own personal feelings and preferences? And it's not that there's not things that I desire, right? Of course there's stuff. I mean, going back to the empathy conversation, it'd be really nice if the whole world was like, hey, you don't ever have to empathize and you can just express, because I'm wired to do that, right? I'm not wired to keep my opinions to myself. So it'd be easier for me if the world wasn't built on, making people feel understood, but it's not built on that. So despite my preference, I have to adjust to reality, not adjust reality to me. So yeah, I think it's equal parts, Tyler, this interest in the actual discovery of the truth. And then I guess 3 parts, equal parts of interest in discovery of the truth. I believe in and care about people. And so I want people to I love, love, love people. And I want people to enjoy, and it pains me to see people, you can probably pick this up in my daily discipline newsletter. It pains me to see people making obvious mistakes. It pains me. It pains me to see people making like even medium level mistakes that are relatively simple. If they just put like a little bit of intent behind something, they could get over that, so, and then there's the really hard battles that I want people to be capable for, but I know that's a smaller group that are going to do that, but I want most people to have that. And then the third thing that I've become really enamored with through this process over the last 20 plus years, probably you started around when I was 20, so about 25 years now, is I love the process of finding a truth, identifying a truth, recognizing a truth, and then converting it into a way that human beings can grab a hold of it and use it. So I love, come over here, right? Like, there's not a book on that shelf. Well, maybe other than that red kit is like a old. I went to an old bookstore and I found this super old speaker's kit, and it's like 7 little books on speaking, like tips and anecdotes and jokes, and it's like super old. It's from like 1904, but I love it because I look at that and I read it and I'm like, okay, this is in 1900s when you were speaking to a group, and so what happens was it shows me truth that worked in 1900. Okay, well, that joke doesn't work anymore that's in there, but what was it doing and why did people find it funny, and what's the truth underneath there and the dynamic or the psychology that is still today? But all those other books, like there's not a book in there that's been written in the last 2,000 years up there. And when I read those, I'll read 5 pages that take me 2 hours to read, and I'm underlining, writing notes and grabbing it. And then I am like, the health of this is debatable, but I'm obsessed with, okay, I want to take my understanding and then convert what I read in there through my understandings into, because I know people aren't going to read that book much, or if they do, they're not going to do something with it. How do I convert those 5 pages and the principles that were in there through the understanding that I have and some of the tools, if there's a truth I recognize, into utility for the people who are never going to go read that book and do a lot. I want to do that legwork. So a lot of times when I'm working myself and privately, and I'm in here, and when I'm sitting in this chair and I'm going through it, I'm spending hours to break something down in 5 pages and then find a way to help other people get access to it without having to go through all the sweat equity that I went through, but like convert it into a more palatable, simple, usable thing than that, because that's kind of prohibitive for a large section of people who are just, they're not going to read through Horace, or they're not going to read through Odes and Epodes, or they're not going to read through, there's a green book somewhere on this shelf over here, which is a breakdown of another philosopher of Epictetus, Enchiridion. And the Enchiridion was written by Arrian, and Arrian was a soldier who studied the Stoic philosophers and then wrote the Enchiridion, which it stands for the Life Manual. And so I'm reading another philosopher's, from hundreds, thousands of years later, breakdown of the Enchiridion. So I'm reading one philosopher's breakdown of another philosopher's book, and I'm like reading that one, and I'm like taking that breakdown, and I'm like, man, this is so obscure and so far out, but there's just there's all this gold in there. And I'm like, okay, well, I've got these tools and systems and E plus R equals O and discipline and emotions and empathy and all this stuff that I know and stuff and systems that I built. And if I can pull these truths and find a way to help them get across better in these spots, I mean, to me, like, I want to go skydiving. I want to go snowboarding. I want to go surfing. I want to go dive with sharks. I want to play football. And then I want to do that. That's what I love to do. Where does that come from? Man, if you find out, let me know.
I mean,
I don't know.
The first handful of them are growing up in California. The football part of it, obviously, there's a bigger connection to that. But it's the curiosity, the desire to wonder and to make connections. It's, I think, very much of the great philosophers. And I think here's the problem: is we live in such a fast-paced world that chooses to be fast-paced by our devices and or the world at business. And we're convinced that's the only way through. That too often, and in great, deprecation to all of us, is we don't take time to think. One of the things you talk about, Angel's book, I've done this several years now. I love to go back and read Think and Grow Rich. It was written, 100 years ago. Why? Because, man, what Napoleon Hill was writing about then is so applicable today. One of my practices for 5-6 years, reading Solomon every single day, because again, you see it in a different way, but it's also that, and I think there's a penchant of do what you can handle and do, but it's like, man, when you see things that were happening thousands of years ago and they're still relevant today, why are we missing the boat?
That's the question to ask, right? And before why are we missing the boat? Because even if you think that, let's just say we had an answer to that. Here's why we're missing the boat. That's still not going to solve it, because here's what's underneath that. If people were struggling with that 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, what do we know then? It doesn't matter if you answer why we're missing the boat. It's not going to fix it. So pointing out, we this and that and this. So when I read that stuff, what I look at is I'm less in the why are we missing it, right? Not that it's not a relevant question, but what I've realized is that that's not the most important question. The most important question is, what am I doing to ensure that I don't make that mistake? Because if it was a problem 2,000 years ago, here's what we know. It will be a problem 2,000 years from now. Mm-hmm. So I teach discipline. I will, my dad said this all the time, and it's true. He said, listen, my mission will outlive me. I will die before this gets accomplished. And he did. And the same thing is true with me. I teach discipline, like empathy. I don't have naturally disciplined bones in my body. Some people do, and that's awesome for them. I don't. So it was all manual labor for me, learned ability. But I'm not going to make the world a disciplined place. I'm going to help people learn discipline, but I am not going to fix discipline in the world. The world is never going to become disciplined in the way that I teach it, ever. Because it has never operated that way, because we're human beings. The question is, what am I doing in my life? And then what am I doing to help the people that I can affect and teach and help? And so, same thing with empathy, right? Self-interest is the single strongest driver of human behavior, and that will never change.
It's a survival mechanism.
It's the survival mechanism. And so what we're talking about is, right, we can affect the people who listen to this, or the people we have a conversation with, or our family, and we can grow it, and we can, what do we call it? Like put a dent in the world. Yeah, we can do those things. But I like reading that stuff because, when I read about the Roman armies in, 300 AD were suffering from young soldiers who didn't want to work in the main army because they didn't get paid enough and the work was too hard, and they thought leaders were too disciplinarian on them. And so they enlisted in auxiliary units on the outskirts where they got paid more, had shorter hours, and they didn't have to do such hard work. I'm like, okay, well, who's that sound like? Right? That sounds exactly like what people are complaining about with quote unquote, whatever this generation we're talking about. And this was 2,000 years ago in Rome with the soldiers. So whatever people are talking about, this is different. No, it is not. It is not different. What's different is we have phones. What's different is we can communicate across the world. But the people that are there is not a different generation. You're telling me that 16 and 20 and 22-year-olds who have low responsibilities, are dependent on some other people, and get a little cash in their pocket and a little freedom, you're telling me that they don't make great decisions? You're telling me that they lack a little bit of maturity? And you're shocked by this? And then you're telling me that when they get to 35 and 45 and they get a spouse and they have a couple kids and a mortgage and a job, that they get maturity. And they, oh my gosh, look what happens as you go through life and you start taking responsibility on. You do what every human being does, is you learn all of those things that start to happen. So, put me in the camp of, somebody who looks at, seeing 20-year-olds and they watch a 20-year-old and it's like, I'm 42 and I see a 20-year-old and it's really hard for me to remember exactly what I was like at 20. But I look at a 20-year-old and I can say, oh yeah, I know this because I'm 42. I got 2 kids. I own a business. I built a house. I've had, that person's never actually had bills before. How could they possibly understand what I think they should understand? They've never done any of this stuff. And guess what? When you give it to them, they learn.
And I think that to me is,
I know I took a left turn into
it's great because it's very much applicable to the, hey, and this is just mine, is you provide absolute, this is the what. And it's where I get into conversations with people. It's like, well, don't give me, the problems. Tell me the solutions. I'm like, okay, well, great. I can give you a Band-Aid for your, massive gash on your arm. That's not going to fix it. Understand why did you, it's kind of like you keep getting Band-Aids because you have a cut on your arm. You have a cut on your arm, cut on your arm. Why are you cutting your arm? Well, you're throwing it against, there's a razor blade in your jacket. It's like, why don't you figure out the razor blade in your jacket? And I think that's where my perspective comes a little bit. It's like, all right, I understand the what. Hey, I need to take need to suture up this wound. Great. Why do I have the wound? And maybe that comes back to my own personal experiences, because I understand the solution is way more effective once you understand why are you doing it in the first place. And I don't think we understand why we're not. It comes back to, why are you not expressing empathy? To me, my belief was it was because my insecurity was keeping me from it, because I built these barriers around me to protect me, even though, when I took those barriers off, it was easier to be empathetic. And man, that was way more fulfilling. And that's actually when it worked out better. I understand your exact point. Yes, I take these ideas and I, mix it in this framework for people. And, that's where I think it all needs to be done for us to progress forward. Or guess what? We'll end up the exact same as every other society. And quite honestly, there will be people that do. Just is what it is.
Human nature is the only unchanged thing in the world over the course of history is, the surface of the earth has undergone a lot of stuff, but as long as human beings have been here, human nature is unchanged. And I don't expect that it changes in our lifetime either.
One final question, Brian, is where can people learn more about you, your work, your newsletter, all that good stuff?
Yeah. Social, easy to find, at T Brian Kight. It's because my first name is Timothy. Sometimes people are like, oh, T stands for the. I was like, well, one, be a big ego on me to put the Brian Kight in front of my name. Also, I probably wouldn't abbreviate it to a T. So the T is because my parents named me Timothy, but called me Brian. So T Brian Kight on all the social. And then I write a daily newsletter called Daily Discipline. It's free, dailydiscipline.com. And we actually just quietly, softly have I would say relaunched our Daily Discipline community, which is we're going to pair with the newsletter and do a lot of stuff. We'll do video breakdowns on each of the Daily Discipline newsletters that come out Monday through Friday. Have different coaching groups, have different groups and spaces where you can join with people who are wanting to apply discipline in particular ways, whether it be sales or leadership or parenting or coaching or weight loss, weight gain, dealing with things in life, where you can kind of get in with people who are trying to go down a similar journey to where you're going on, skills you're trying to build, targets you're trying to hit. And you can, interact, with them and with us. We're going to host workshops and stuff in there. And so you can get that at inside the Data Discipline newsletter.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for everyone watching and listening. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button as well as the bell, so that way you get notified each time we release new content. And for those of you that are listening on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that stuff, if you could do this, if you could rate and review this episode, so that way more people can hear from impactful leaders like Brian, I would appreciate it. Till next time, choose to lead with impact.